All right, if you're trying to turn your Excel spreadsheet into some kind of application, this video is going to help you avoid making some of the big mistakes along the way. So in this video, we'll go over who this is for, who shouldn't do this, and if you're going to do this, how to do this the right way. So Adam, thanks for joining me as usual. We're the co-founders of Pilot West Studios here out of Nashville, Tennessee. So we create custom business applications for a living, and sometimes part of that is converting an Excel spreadsheet monster that a business has been running on for years or decades into a custom application. So we want to talk through how to do this like we talked about. So Adam, should most people, especially business owners, do this at all?
Excel or Google Sheets is probably one of the most ubiquitous pieces of software in existence. Everybody, if you've ever touched a computer, you've probably seen or used or built a spreadsheet. So it's an incredible piece of software. It's completely changed the way computing is done. Truly, I mean, like, so much runs on spreadsheets, and a lot of those things should continue to run on spreadsheets.
Right, because imagine if spreadsheets somehow like corrupted, Google Sheets and Excel like somehow was corrupted for everybody. Imagine the billions, if not trillions of dollars of loss that would occur with something like that.
I can't even begin to imagine. Like it runs so much. So it ain't broke. You know, like, I think we should start there. Like, if you're considering migrating your spreadsheet over to an app, understand that there are real reasons that you should do that. But one of them is not because of a fundamental flaw in spreadsheets. Most of the time, it's because you've outgrown something. But we'll get to that in a minute.
When you're thinking about this decision, again, the math has changed as we talked about in the last video. So even if this was 2 or 3 years ago, this used to be a decision that if you're going to do this, okay, we got to pony up 50 to 100K as a business to do this right. And we had a customer, a construction company who paid $40,000 to convert it into a custom application. And they just, I don't even know how that worked, but they essentially just embedded an Excel spreadsheet into an application's interface and then changed nothing about it. And they paid $40K for that. And that was like 2 or 3 years ago. So that's a real situation, right? You'd have to think about finding a vendor to convert this and spend 50 to 100K, or you try to find someone overseas to do it cheaper and pray that they can get it right. But now it's much different. It's a much different situation of either being able to do this easier with a vendor who's competent, or you could just kind of do this yourself if you're savvy enough. And it's closer more to, instead of needing 50 to 100K to do it, it's like, can you use a computer? Can you interface with an AI? So let's talk about what is actually different now as we think about this through the lens of 2026.
Yeah, so I think the big obvious answer of what's different, whereas 2 years ago, you know, we would have cautioned people to pump the brakes, and we do still caution people to pump the brakes, but some of those people, we would give them a different answer today. And the answer would be, AI has changed how we approach this. It's changed the economics of what does it actually cost to do a high quality, carefully considered migration away from an Excel spreadsheet into a custom application. AI has completely changed that. What it has not changed is the underlying principles, the foundation of why do we do this in the first place. And I'll give you a hint. It's not because again, spreadsheets have some fundamental flaw. A lot of times it's because you have outgrown the data format of spreadsheets, right? A spreadsheet is essentially a database. I'm papering over a lot when I say that, but in general, the average layperson can think of a spreadsheet as a database. You have multiple tabs, which are multiple tables in a database. You can make them talk to each other and reference data from each other. The real part that you tend to outgrow is business logic and workflow and visualization. And those are two things that that is why an application sits on top of a database. The database holds your data. It ensures data integrity, but the visualization, the data workflows, all of those things happen a layer above the database. And typically, when people are ready to make the switch, it's because there is a ton of value either in the visualization or in the application processes themselves that currently you're having to tell people, don't edit this table, go edit that table. You know, don't modify this file, go modify this other file instead. So that's a big that is a big indicator that this is this is actually a real problem, and you actually should consider migrating to an application from a spreadsheet.
Right. And to say it differently, if this is going to meaningfully impact your business in a very tangible way by converting this to an application, and you can see how, and it really just boils down to, when we talk about doing this, what does a business and a business owner care about? It's either like time or money. You can boil most things down to time or money, whether for yourself or for your employees. And so if you can see the real tangible effects of cleaning this up and making this into an application, then absolutely, it makes a lot of sense. But what is very common for entrepreneurs and for business owners and even employees is that this can become a very fun side quest where it's like, well, we need to do this. Well, why? Because otherwise, it's a fun distraction that's actually distracting you from the real levers you can pull in your business to move your business forward. Or at the very least, if not that, what you actually need to do to just clean up your spreadsheet, make it easier and more livable on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, there's definitely work that you can do in your spreadsheet if your primary problems are things feel clunky. There is even some visualization work that you can do. We can dive more into that later. We can talk later about what we did with Runway, our internal financial tool that we moved out of a spreadsheet into a custom web application. But you have to start with the outcome. You have to start with articulating, okay, if I put this effort in, if we're going to go from here to here, what outcome do I need to see happen in my business? And I want a new dashboard is not an outcome. I can't track revenue accurately. That's an outcome, right? That actually impacts your business. So you need to start with a very clear, crystal clear outcome of, when I am done, my business will be different because of X. And that X is your North Star. That's what's going to point you through the process. It's also going to give you a really nice starting point of where do you actually begin translating this spreadsheet into a custom application.
Right. Now, before we get into the how-to, because I think that tees up really nicely the steps, the practical steps that anyone can take to begin converting this, but I want to take it actually a step back to begin to outline, okay, we talked about when this might make sense. We talked a little bit about when this doesn't make sense, but like, is there anything else that someone should consider, or who isn't a good fit for converting an application? Like, who should not do this?
I think in general, the problems should be pretty easy to quantify. You should be able to say, because of this spreadsheet, my business cannot X. If you can't say that, or if you just have a lot of free time and you just want to play around, go for it. But don't kid yourself. If you cannot articulate what the outcome should be, and you cannot articulate how is my business going to move forward by a problem that is being presented by the spreadsheet, if you can't articulate that well, then you can do it. I can't tell you how to spend your time, but you shouldn't do it. You should not spend time because there's probably other more valuable things that you can be doing if you cannot articulate any outcomes at all. So really, I think it's limited to that. I think it's limited to, can you articulate outcomes? If you're, maybe you're a freelancer, and you don't have to interface with 6 other people, and maybe like your spreadsheet's pretty simple, but you would just like better visualizations. Be honest with yourself, and don't say, well, I should make this a custom application just because I can, just because there's, Google application scripts or Lovable or these drag and drop UI builders. Just because you can does not mean that you should, right? In fact, that's kind of one of the traps of AI, is because you can, a lot of people do. And the bar for discipline is actually even higher, to avoid kind of fooling yourself to think that like, well, because of AI, I can just slap this together and it'll get done faster. That's great, but swimming really fast in the wrong direction is still the wrong direction, regardless of how good you are and how fast you're getting there.
And we say that as practitioners of that philosophy, because we're an engineering company. So that means that we have relatively unlimited resources to be able to throw at problems if we want to, and to build whatever we want. And so we actually push this out when we're thinking about internal tooling or tooling that for our clients that we're trying to build. Like, we are very diligent in ensuring that when we are building, it is meeting these criteria, because we recognize that we could be going down a path of hundreds of hours or at least dozens of hours of trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. And so I really just wanted to hammer that idea home, because it is so important that just because you can doesn't mean you should. Again, if you actually care about growing your business.
Right. Yeah, that's, I think, probably the number one principle. It's the number one thing that we really harp on. And incidentally, it's like what we spend the most time on whenever we talk to people, whenever we're talking to a prospect and they become a client. Probably 80% of all of our communication in the beginning is understanding intent. Why are we here? Why are we talking? What change needs to happen in your business? Because if that's like the first number one full stop, if we can't articulate that, we've had many people who, after an hour of talking, the end result was, I want to do it because it would be cool. And look, we're not saints here. If you want to pay us to do it because it's cool, send us your money. You know what I'm saying? But like, ethically speaking, I feel very uncomfortable when somebody cannot articulate to me how this is going to benefit them. Because if you cannot explain to me how this is going to benefit you, how it's going to push your business forward, how am I supposed to know if we're getting it right? There's an infinite number of ways to rebuild something. There's an infinite number of ways to design something. So you have to have some sort of North Star. You have to have some sort of rubric that you can hold up and say, yes, this is hitting the mark, or no, we're not quite there yet. Without that, you will just spend money and time and effort forever without knowing if you've actually arrived there. The only thing that will stop you will just be exhaustion, right? I'm sick and tired of working on this problem, so I'm just going to stop here. Okay, it'd be better if you had an outcome that you were aiming at from the start.
Right. It's like when you are wanting to lose weight, if you just want to be jacked and look great, like that may be able to carry you to the outcome that you want. But for it to have like real change in what you're doing and how you're living, it has to be tied into greater value beyond just vanity. And that can be the same for building something like this. Is if you just want vanity because it's cool, could it get you there to success? Yeah, maybe. But it's not going to be tied to, you're going to abandon it really quickly when it becomes uncomfortable and becomes hard and it is no longer fun anymore. And that's unfortunate. That's the unfortunate reality with especially startup founders who are building things. It's like, if you don't have a really good idea, really clear picture of what you're trying to solve and what you're trying to do, then you're going to be quick to abandon it when it really gets hard. And so that's why we reinforce the North Star development. That's how we operate in our own businesses. We articulate what we're aiming for. And when we're talking about like the runway application that we built, it was based off an Excel. And I just threw our finances into an Excel. I operated out of it for over probably a year and a half, and it was fine. And then I was beginning to hit limitations. And so it started to be like, all right, how can we improve this experience? And we began to see, all right, we are hitting the limitations of what Excel or spreadsheets could do. And so talked to Adam and we articulated, all right, what is it that we have to replicate that's like non-negotiable? Well, it has to keep track of financial data. So like, that's pretty simple. That's just money fields within a certain table. Okay, well, we can do that. And it's just plus and minuses at the end of the day. That's easy. And then it got into, but what is the actual constraint that we're solving for that Excel or the spreadsheet isn't? Well, right now it's really hard to understand projections since we have a retainer basis. We need to know like how we can handle and we need to manage cash. Was it completely vital to the business? No, but it was very helpful to understand how do we take out distributions, or how do we reinvest into growth? And so being able to know your downside and be able to prepare for if things drop off, and then also be able to prepare for upside and then have a reality somewhere in between, gave us a lot more financial stability of being able to plan a little bit more ahead in the projections of our business. So again, was it, when we're looking back at our own rubric, was it necessary in our business? No. I mean, Excel could have moved this along, but did it give us meaningful information to make impactful decisions in our business to benefit it? Yes.
Yeah, and notice the way that we built Runway. We were very disciplined, though we, according to our own standard, while we could have potentially pushed this problem down the road a little bit, we were very, very disciplined with how we built it. I started with that core foundation of what problem are we solving? The problem is we have no good way to ask what ifs. What if we added 2 clients this month and another one dropped off? What do our finances look like next month? Like, we had no good way to project. We could have built that in an Excel spreadsheet, but we knew that that was one part of several different tabs that we had in our master, finance spreadsheet. We knew that that was one well-defined problem. And we'll get to this in just a second, telling other people how they can get started, but we started with just that one core foundational idea. And then what did I do? I came to you every week and I said, Jake, what are you still using the spreadsheet for that Runway doesn't do? And you would tell me the problem, and I would ask more questions, and I would ask more questions, and I would ask more questions to figure out, what is the spreadsheet doing that Runway can't do? What problems is it solving that Runway's not yet solving? And eventually we got to a point where you're like, nothing. There's nothing that the spreadsheet's doing for us that Runway doesn't do. And that's how we knew we arrived. That was our outcome.
It even eliminated a subscription. Because you remember, you asked, like, what else does it do? Like, well, it technically replaces the Excel, but I also would love to not have to pay for HubSpot to keep track of deals. And it's just a deal board. So can you build me a deal board? Because it actually makes a lot of sense that our sales projections and data flows to financials. Because if they get actualized or realized into revenue, then you just need to take it from perspective, deal to actualized deal, and it flows into the finances. Whoa, hey, that makes a lot of sense. And we saved ourselves, $40 a month.
And that's a great example of a business workflow that is not a great, it's not impossible, but it's not a great fit for Excel. The business workflow being when the prospect, when the sales pipeline, when they land in this column, which is closed won, when they land in this column, that should now be a new project, which means we need to find a developer who's going to work on it. Like, these are all things that, like, they happen naturally in the business. But now Runway can enforce it. Runway can make it to where when you drag that over to closed won, it automatically shows up as a project. It automatically says something like, hey, you don't have any developers to source this, or whatever we need it to do. It is now a business workflow that's codified. It's written in code. And because it matches the way that we run our business, like, to your point, we can just remove this subscription because HubSpot does a million things that we are not trying to replicate. The one thing that we needed was a deal board. Well, we don't need that anymore. So we can get rid of the subscription, and it matches our workflows better. So that was a fantastic example of, like, how business workflow, like, that wasn't a visualization problem. It was actually a workflow problem.
Exactly. And so, trying to think of something pithy, but I'm having trouble. I think maybe it's this. If your Excel operates more like a calculator, it needs to stay like a calculator. If your Excel is hitting limitations and it needs to act more like an employee, then a custom application actually makes a lot of sense. Because what are you doing? Like, it would be hard to replicate the logic needed to have memory and to understand the logic in how we do things. It can't hold that. AI can hold that pretty well within a thread or within an agent, but the application can do that very efficiently, and it knows our bench, and we can attach someone here, where that would just be kind of band-aid solutions and workarounds to make it work in Excel, right? So now we've talked about the logic. Hopefully someone knows I'm in the camp where this does make sense, or I'm not in the camp where this doesn't make sense. If you're to actually take some practical advice on, okay, where do I start? This is the right next 3 steps you really need to take to ensure that you can do this right. So let's say Monday morning, Adam, what needs to happen for someone looking to do this?
Right. So you've already got your outcome. You know what change you want to see in your business, and you're relatively sure this is not going to be a waste of your time. So where I would start, and in fact, where we did start with Runway, was I took a copy of our Excel file and I put it into the Claude desktop app. And I simply started asking questions such as, hey, if we were going to represent a list of our projects with a developer assigned to the project, here's some of our key business constraints. How would you represent this visually in a web page? Like that was basically where I started. I just started very simply. Keep in mind, we had like a lot of tabs. I could have just said, recreate this spreadsheet as a web app. Don't do that. That is a that is a recipe to start with a system that is way more complex than it needs to be. Might be wrong in subtle ways. You really want to start with just the simplest, smallest building block. Ideally, the biggest thing that is directly related to your outcome. So for us, it was projections. So I said, what I want you to think through is a UI. I want you to think through a visualization where we can see reality as it is today. So that's our current client list. What are they paying us? What are our costs for paying developers? And I kind of want to see it structured a little bit as a table, right? Because a table is a pretty decent visualization for that problem. But now the real problem was the projections. I want an easy way to be able to copy reality into a separate tab, call it something, right? Like this is what we want to project what happens if we gain one client a month for the next year and we don't lose anybody. Let's look at that projection. And I started with a visualization, a simple HTML file. That was it, just an HTML file. And if you're using Claude, if you're using the Claude desktop app, you can see that right there in the app. You don't need to set up, a development environment or anything like that. You don't need any coding skills. You can literally just ask Claude and it'll show you right there. And then you can just iterate. You can look at it and you can know this is useful or this is gimmicky, or you can come up with 1,000 critiques and you can start to like kind of hone that in with Claude. But really, what you should be evaluating is, does this feel like it is going to help me solve this problem? And begin iterating, working on that. You should probably be able to get to a very easy like proof of concept where you kind of feel good about it within a couple of hours, if that, and then you can make the decision like, does this feel like it's moving the right direction? And eventually, you're probably going to outrun the limit of your conversation. You'll outrun your context limit. You might eventually need to download those files, put them on your computer, but you have Professor Claude, right? Ask Claude, how do I develop this locally on my machine? If you're on a Windows or if you're on a MacBook or a Linux or whatever, how do I begin working with this locally? You might even use Claude Code, the command line tool, or you might just keep working in the desktop app.
When we're thinking about, okay, you said put it into Claude, right? And refine the tool once you've articulated what your North Star is or what you're actually trying to accomplish, right? That's the main goal for Claude, and that's the main goal for you. And then you're trying to simplify it, right? You're trying to simplify, seeing where you can cut out or simplify the Excel. That's kind of where you're focusing at first before you get into the actual building. Then you get into the building phase once you feel like that's been simplified, and you can carry that over probably to a new thread and begin the building process. So I think the right next question here for Adam, most people would be, when is good enough? Because like we've experienced with a client in the past, we were doing this. We were converting Excel over to an application. We had a very well articulated North Star that the client agreed to as the MVP. But it wasn't that he shouldn't have necessarily gone from Excel to an application, but you could, I guess, make the argument that maybe it was a little early. But even more egregious to the situation was it put him in a bind, specifically because the goalpost kept getting moved. Instead of the North Star guiding us all in the same direction to where we can say, this is good enough, let's reevaluate what really matters now. I imagine that a lot of people, once they can see the power of AI, will begin to do more and more and more and more and more and more. Because when I do talk to someone who has something built in Claude, or I meet a business owner who has something built in one of these AI tools, it's never that it's simple and basic. It is always that they've created 10 different modules. And so when, for anyone doing this problem or doing this workflow, when is it ever the place that they can evaluate truly this is good enough?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the biggest problem that people run into. So once again, discipline is kind of like it is at a premium when you can do everything. That's actually risky. It's actually risky that you have unlimited power here, right? So I think this is why we have settled on this North Star outcome-based development, because it's obvious. It is obvious if you have framed your outcome and your North Star well. It is obvious when you have arrived. So, for example, one of our North Stars was we want to be able to like this app should be good enough that somebody would pay a subscription to use it. Full stop. Right? What needs to exist for somebody to pay to use it, and that's it. Nothing else. And if you can be disciplined and you can stick to that North Star, you'll notice that actually answers a lot of questions. So, for example, would you use an app where you couldn't recover your password? Probably, right? Like if you can just text the person that you're working with and they can reset it for you, like that might not be a critical feature. Or it might be, right? It also depends on scale. Do you have 10 people using this app? Do you have 1,000? Do you have 10,000? Can all 10,000 of those people call you or text you? If you have 10,000 people that can call you and text you, you should probably give them as many self-service tools as possible. That's a much different problem from if you have 10 people who you're working intimately with to build an internal tool, right? So there's a lot of corners that you can shave off. It's about discipline. It's about cutting. So the way that you get out of that, the way that you avoid the trap is you ask, what can we remove? What can we get rid of? What is just fluff here and is not pushing us towards our outcome? And it's hard. It's really, really, really hard. But the better you become at that, the more useful everything that we've discussed here is. In fact, if you were somebody who could look at yourself objectively and say, I am really good at cutting scope. I am really good at ruthlessly cutting requirements. We have some clients like this who are really, really good at saying, we don't need that. If you're that person, I would say that you can begin the process of moving from your spreadsheet to your application sooner because you are pragmatic and very honest with yourself about what needs to exist. Now, this is like the old Chinese proverb, know thyself, right? Like if you know yourself and you know that you love the flashy buttons and you like the intricate design and stuff like that, pump the brakes. And I would say put a larger burden of proof upon yourself before you start building. Because this is an endless well. There is no floor. You will keep going forever. And that is a great way to feel very productive and waste your time.
Exactly. And it's important to note that, listen, once you hit your objective, your goal, your North Star, like we mentioned, you can evaluate and then redefine your next North Star. That's why we operate in a phased approach in our business, because there's multiple ways that we've talked about many times, but really big ways that everybody can have aligned focus and incentives, meaning the client, the developer, us, them, like we're all heading in the same agreed direction, which is ultimately a business outcome. And the North Star, to your point of what you mentioned, like you'll know when you get there, only if you've articulated it in a how do we know? How do we know when we get there? Well, we should see XYZ result. We should see time savings. We should see a difference in this or that, or our auditing should be easier, right? They should be very tangible, very measurable results when we're articulating the North Star. So it's okay that once you get there, that like you evaluate and redefine what the next North Star is. Like that is totally fine. But what we're saying is don't conflate two North Stars. Focus on one thing at a time, and that's how you can ensure you can actually move a lot quicker in this process.
I'll give one final example of a North Star because they don't all have to be these like hard scientific metrics, but they need to be something you can evaluate. We had one North Star that I was particularly proud of because it really cut to the heart of the issue, and it actually gave us a very nice, objectively measurable thing. And the North Star was this: our client didn't want to be embarrassed by their software system. They didn't want the reputational damage that came with showing some system that other people perceived as being subpar or not being polished enough. So like that's a perfectly valid North Star. Maybe you have an ugly spreadsheet and you hop on like video calls with your clients and you're like, oh God, like this just kind of looks unprofessional. Your North Star might be, I don't want to cringe when I share my screen with my client. That's a valid North Star, and you'll know when you get there. Now, when you start adding in all the extra features and stuff like that, right, you'll say, hey, does this at all contribute to Does this at all contribute to me not cringing when that person hops on the call with me? And if the answer is no, you know that you've arrived at your outcome and you're starting to build extra stuff now. And now you can iterate, and you might say, well, I want this to make me money. Now that I'm not cringing, now I want this thing to actually drive revenue. And you might have some specific ways that you can measure that it's actually doing that. But you'll notice that being embarrassed or cringing at something that you're demoing to a client is a very kind of like, it's a feeling, but it gives you a very objective way to say, am I closer or far away? Am I straying off into left field that has nothing to do with this? It keeps you focused on what result do I need to get out of this?
Okay, to summarize for those listening, we'll cut this video down into 30 seconds. 1, evaluate, is this going to move your business forward? Or is this going to become a distraction? If you can define that it's going to move your business forward, you need to then create a North Star. Because only know if it's going to move your business forward by converting this Excel into a custom application is defining, if so, how, in what ways, what are the measured results that you should see in doing this process. So that's the foundation. Then the actual workflow is dump this into a spreadsheet, the spreadsheet into Claude or Grok or your AI of choice. And first start off with, don't even build. Start a fresh thread with just saying, how can we improve or simplify this? Because you don't want to replicate bad data flow if possible. You want to capture and simplify this as much as you can. Worst case scenario, you have a better Excel spreadsheet that works and you don't even build an application. But if you go on to build an application, start a fresh thread of an agent or a thread that is actually going to be focusing on building. You take what you've refined, you put it into your AI of choice, and then you go, you start the building process, even if it's just, HTML, just something that you can see once you can say that you understand the problem. And then once you're able to refine and you're able to see as you continue to build and refine and build and refine and build and refine, you should be able to look constantly back at the North Star to say, have we met this? Have we met this? Does this meet my goal? And if so, great. Evaluate, use it, move on, or you can start a new North Star. And if you'd like to know more of how we did this, we're actually going to, in the next few videos, outline and show you real examples of our prior Excel spreadsheet, or it's actually a Google sheet, and what we have built with our Runway application, which is the financial portion of all how our business operates. Thanks for watching.